Hello and welcome everyone to today's conversation on Keep the Peace with Conflict Coaching. Love this topic, love the work in this area, and am anticipating lots of fun in a very quick 30-minute conversation. So please keep in mind you are invited to ask questions. You can do that either by typing them in the question panel as we go, or sometimes I have people that are brave and you raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your question live. Yes, the recording will be loaded on the YouTube channel at the end of this conversation, and I will send all of you a direct link to it. So in the meantime, fast 30 minutes, let's dive in. First off, our agenda for today's conversation. We're going to talk about how to handle conflict, the reasons behind conflict, what happens, and then the results. We'll give some tips worth knowing, and then we're going to talk about, okay, what are the skills for managing conflict? How do you do conflict coaching? We'll discuss some what-if scenarios. We'll talk about the reasons conflict coaching works, and then of course identify some resources. So lots to cover very quickly. Diving in, how do you handle conflict? Well, first off, recognize what's behind the conflict. And that calls for stepping back and being aware. Recognize there are differences in personalities, and sometimes that in and of itself is what's behind the conflict. Different ideas, different levels of commitment or engagement, different personalities. There are a lot of considerations to that. So what's behind the conflict? Another key piece to this, in addition to recognizing different personalities because of how they approach conflict, is going to be your own communication skills. So when you're doing conflict coaching, how you say what you say makes a tremendous difference. Your listening skills, and of course we all say, yeah, that makes sense. It's so incredibly important during a conflict situation that you are actively listening, rephrasing what people are saying. Very, very important. And then of course, knowing the process. So just as coaching in and of itself has a process, and there's a lot of science behind how we do what we do and the order we do it in, conflict is the same concept. Now, the reasons behind conflict, of course, it's going to vary. Here are some common ones. A misunderstanding. It's funny, people can be saying the same thing different ways and not realize they're saying the same thing. So it's as simple as that misunderstanding. It can be a misperception, sometimes of intention, sometimes of what people are doing, etc. Sometimes it's based on they only have part of the information. Another big one is fear. So when people are afraid, that's usually a secondary piece. It's because they're angry about something, because they lack confidence, etc. And it does influence their perceptions. That fear can cause people to strike out, be angry, etc. Sometimes it's confusion, not getting or understanding what something is. It can be a difference of opinion. That's called pretty normal. We're all human and we all do have different opinions. So an awareness of that. And sometimes it's because people are simply disengaged, a lack of interest or care in that, and someone else thinks it's important. So these are possible reasons. Obviously, there are more. This is a good starting point. Now, when there is conflict, what happens? So think back, we mentioned different personalities. Different people do things, approach things differently. So you will have some people, some personalities that will simply give in when there's a conflict, or they will withdraw, pull back, so that whatever it is just going to happen whether or not they have anything to do with it. Then you're going to have personalities that will promote or sell their own ideas and become big advocates. Hey, this is what I want, this is how I want it to be, etc. You'll have people that address conflict by having the answer. And as far as they're concerned, their answer is the one and only answer. It's the right answer, and forget it for everyone else. They just don't know what they're talking about. And that's their way of dealing with the conflict. Then you have people that want to research and analyze, and they actually withdraw to do that. Now, what's interesting here is all of these are ways of actually avoiding conflict. If somebody gives into a conflict, they've avoided the conflict because they gave in and now it's over. If somebody's promoting or selling their own ideas, in essence, they're ignoring the conflict because it's all about what their idea is. If someone has the answer, there is no conflict. They have the answer. They're done. And if somebody withdraws to do research or analysis, again, they're avoiding the conflict. They withdrew from it. So it's ironic that our natural tendencies go in one of these directions. And in essence, what happens is we end up avoiding or stepping away from conflict. Now, one of the quotes I often share with people, I love this one. It is from Helga Rhodes, and she said, conflict is a fact of life. It does not have to be a way of life. So think about what happens with these different personalities in these interactions. Ultimately, we teach other people how to treat us, how to interact with us, etc. So if we withdraw or we shut it down or whatever else it is we do, all of a sudden we're teaching other people, hey, that's how to interact with us. Now, the other thing, the avoidance of the conflict, means we're missing out on an opportunity. You see, conflict, when managed effectively, is actually a good thing because it opens up the possibilities. We consider different ideas and perspectives and opportunities, etc. So it's a fabulous opportunity when we have the conversation, and it's about managing that effectively. Now, a couple of things in terms of information behind some of this. What are some of the results of conflict? Well, and you've all seen different studies. So here's one. In Managing Differences, last name Dana said 60 to 80% of difficulties in organizations are from these strained relationships. So people have the skill, they have the interest in doing well in their work, and these interactions, these relationships get in the way of them doing that. Now, another one, 25 to 50% of a manager's time is spent dealing with conflicts. That's huge. That's expensive. It's a waste of time. So big awareness there. And it goes even further. Fortune 500 senior execs spend 20% of their time in litigation activities. Okay, so if you're a coach and you know how to coach people around conflict, think about the implication here. With that much time being invested in dealing with conflict, if you know how to come in and manage the conversation or approach that conflict effectively, you're really impacting that organization in a big way. Now, when conflict is avoided, is it going to go away? Of course not. It increases, it festers, it simmers and boils underneath the surface. It is possible to address conflict in a way that is going to respect everyone. It's how we do it, how we have the conversation. Also, when you do have that conversation, until every single person feels they have been heard and understood, the conflict is still there. Think about it this way. You know somebody who talks about a problem or an issue, and then they talk about it again and again and again and again. Well, the reason for that is because they don't feel like they were heard and understood. And until they're heard and understood, they're not ready to move forward. So it is so essential we make sure we're creating the space for being heard and understood. Then think about it this way. Conflict, just like coaching, when the people involved are the ones who are deciding on the solution, they own it. And that's where you get the follow through. That's ultimately what coaching is about. It's about putting them in charge of figuring it out. Conflict mediation is the same concept. One of the statistics I've cited over the years, and I love this one, when people go to court in the United States, better than 60% of the time on their way out the door of the courtroom, they're saying, I don't care what the judge said, I am going to do this my way. And the conflict is in fact still there, and they do end up back in court. When you go through a conflict management process, better than 90% of the time, people figure out the answer and follow through on it. I like that statistic a lot better. Definitely something we want to go to. So, what are the skills it takes to effectively manage conflict? First off, your language. How you say what you say. So many of you on the call have gone through coach training, and you remember from your coach training we did a lot of examples, poison words versus phenomenal words. We talked about being clear, being direct, short, simple, etc. That is huge in terms of managing conflict. So that skill you develop as a coach applies very directly in conflict coaching. Another skill you develop as a coach is your short, simple questions that are open to the possibilities. Well, conflict management is the same concept. Short, simple, open questions are going to be effective. That's how you're going to manage it and move it forward. So your coaching skills very directly applied. Now, another thing you learned in coach training is recognizing, yeah, we all have different personalities, different ways of approaching things, thinking about things, etc. And it's about flexing to individual preferences. So back to the concept, sometimes the conflict is because of differences in personalities. Well, if you're the one who is doing the conflict coaching, it's understanding that, recognizing that, and having the conversation based on what's going to work for the people involved. Another coaching skill that applies very directly when you're doing conflict coaching is your listening skills. Actively listening to what people are saying and what they're not saying and rephrasing it. Now, a tweak that we often use in coaching as you advance your skills and develop more fully is when somebody says something in a way that's negative, we rephrase what they say and we either neutralize it or we turn it into a way of saying it positively. This does get used in conflict management. So for example, if somebody says, oh, he ticks me off because he's such a jerk, your rephrasing maybe seems like you get really frustrated because of someone else's approach to this or how it's being handled. And they're going to go, yeah, because that is what it is. And you've completely neutralized what they said in terms of it being negative or an attack. So that's a quick example right there. Let's move into the actual model for conflict coaching. This will be, for those of you who have gone through coach training, this will be familiar to you. What we're going to do is talk about it a couple of different ways. So one possibility is you are coaching one person involved in the conflict and that's it. A different possibility is that you have an opportunity to bring together all of the people involved in the conflict, whether it's two or more, and you're coaching when they're all together. And that can be powerful, by the way, when you have that opportunity. So what exactly is your process? We use the STOP model at the Center for Coaching Certification. And the first step in the STOP model, each letter being standing for something, it's an acronym. The first step is stories. Okay. So if you're coaching an individual client who is dealing with a conflict, what does the stories part mean? It means you start out your coaching session by having them explain, hey, this is what's going on. What's their story? And then after they have explained their story and you rephrase, you actively listen and rephrase to them, then what you do is say to them, okay, pretend like I know nothing and pretend like it's this other person. How are they going to describe the situation? And have your client tell the story from the other person's perspective. Because what's essential here is that we hear the story based on the different perspectives, and that the people involved, obviously, in the conflict, ultimately, it's about them hearing it from the different perspectives. Now, the reason you have your client start with their story first is because only when they've been heard and understood are they ready to move forward. Now, let's say you're doing conflict coaching and you've got 2 or 3 people involved. Each one of them is going to get a chance to tell their story. Now, of course, the challenge there becomes who gets to go first? Well, here's a tip for you. You're not the one to pick, because if you pick who's going to go first, all of a sudden the people involved in the conflict think you're choosing sides, and that doesn't work. So you can ask them who wants to go first and let them self-elect. Alternatively, flip a coin or have some neutral way of deciding who's going to go first. Each person has a chance to tell their story. When they're telling their story, keep in mind the others aren't necessarily ready to hear it from that person. What does happen is when you actively listen and rephrase to the person what they're saying, the other people can hear what you say. And so it does mean there's a chance for everybody to hear and understand the different perspectives. So once everybody has had a chance to tell their story and it's been rephrased to them, then and only then are you ready to move forward. Your second step in the process is listing the topics. What is going to be addressed? What are the key points, etc.? Now, here's something that's essential with this. It has to be one list of topics. For example, if you have 3 people involved in the conflict and each one makes their own list, they are still separate and divided. So it is essential that it be one list, that it be literally and physically one list. Now, if you have those 3 people there, you simply invite them to say, okay, each of you, what do you think the topics are to be addressed? And whatever any one of them feels should be on the list goes on the list. Now, if you have simply one client, you ask them what they think the topics are to be addressed, and then after they've listed their own, you say, okay, and if the other person were here, what additional topics are they going to put on that list? And in that way, you get all of the topics on the table. Once you have all the topics on the table, the next step in the process is exploring options. When you explore options, it is essential that each person give multiple options. You see, if each person only gives one idea or one answer in their mind, that is it. That's the only answer, and they will dig in their heels. End of discussion. So whatever option somebody gives, it's on the table, and you ask them for another one. It's so incredibly important that you get another one from them. So if they say, I don't know, you say to them, okay, if you did know, what's another possibility? If they're still stuck, you might say, okay, what's the worst possible option? And back into it that way. A different way of approaching it is to say, okay, if you asked for advice, what advice might you be given? And go at it until each person gives multiple options. Once everybody involved in the conflict has given multiple options, then you can work on choosing them. Now, if you're coaching one individual, you ask them for their options and have them brainstorm multiple options. And then you say to them, and if the other person were here, what options do they want to put out there? And then from there, whether it's one person or multiple people, okay, which of these options is going to work for everyone? And you have them decide. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you start eliminating options and back into it. Sometimes it's a mix and match or a combination of rewriting of different options. Whatever it is they decide to do, your next step in the process is creating the plan. And the plan is who's doing what, when are they doing it, how are they doing it. So it's incredibly important that it's very clear. That means being specific, being measurable in terms of what the steps are. It is very important that the people involved are the ones writing the steps. So when you have everyone there, obviously they're all there, they're engaged in terms of defining those steps. When you have an individual client who's dealing with a conflict with someone else who's not present, here's your challenge. The other person isn't here in terms of creating the plan and committing to something. So the plan at that point is, how is your client going to now have this conversation with the other person? How are they going to address it with the other person? And sometimes the plan is what your client can do to move this forward. Sometimes the conversation is your client planning how they will have a conversation with the other person, and what you just did with them is their model for that. So ultimately, it's defining the plan. Now, when you're dealing with conflict, you're going to be dealing with some emotions. So how do you handle that? So for example, with these emotions, what if somebody gets really angry? Okay, a couple of thoughts. Most of the time, when somebody's angry, if you give them a chance to vent it out, it'll take them a minute or two. You rephrase what they say, and again, we have a chance to neutralize it, and that will diffuse them, and now you're ready to move forward. Occasionally, you're going to have more challenge than that. So for example, if somebody's getting angry and their loud tone or yelling or whatever else it is really creating an issue, a problem for others, there are a couple of approaches you can do. One is for you to get quieter, calmer, and talk slower, because what happens is you're modeling a calming down. About 80% of the time that'll work, and then the rest of the time you'll actually tick them off even more. If that is the case, occasionally it is important to match their tone and their volume in order to shut it down. So for example, if somebody's yelling, I might jump in and say, I can hear there is a problem. I do want to address it. May I have that opportunity? And by matching their tone and their volume, I get their attention, and the words I'm using are saying, hey, I'm hearing you're angry. I do want to address this and solve this. Can I? Very simply. So that's an example of one way to deal with that anger. Now, what if somebody cries? You get the tears. Okay, first off, you've all heard that song. I can cry if I want to. It's my party, whatever. So keep in mind that tears can be okay. It's absolutely okay for people to have a chance to cry. And it's okay to continue the conversation. So if it's a matter of tears and that kind of thing, and they are still effectively continuing to talk, continue. Give them a Kleenex and continue. Now, if their crying is really intense and it's much deeper and more sobs and that kind of thing, it's important to give them space. Now, I do want to share something with you. With both anger and with tears, if the space is, okay, we'll talk about this later, you literally have taught people, hey, the way to get out of handling this conversation is by getting angry or by crying, whatever the case might be. And we want something different than that. So if it's somebody who's angry, I will say something like, I am going to excuse myself for 10 minutes. We'll talk again in 10 minutes. And it's not about who they are or what they're saying or what they're doing. There's zero attack involved. It's, I'm excusing myself for this period of time. If there are more people involved, it may be, we're going to take a break for 10 minutes. I'm going to run to the restroom and get some coffee. Everybody else, you have a chance to do that too. And again, it's a chance to diffuse it. If it's somebody who's crying, if they're alone, what I'm going to do is simply say, I'm going to turn away and work on something over here and give you some space. When you're ready, we'll talk again. And I'll just work on whatever I'm working on and give them some space. Alternatively, if we are in a group and it's going to be important, I can do the same concept I use with the anger. I can say, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to hit the restroom, get some coffee. Everybody has that opportunity. And I can say to the person who's crying, I can say, I tell you what can I bring for you? That way you can stay here and wait. And I can get it, bring it to them. So give them the privacy in terms of processing that. Now, silence. If you ask a question and people simply go silent, the key to it is go silent also and wait. It may be they're thinking. It may be they're hoping you'll give in and talk and they won't have to answer. And ultimately, either way, it's most respectful to simply go silent and wait until they do jump in and talk. If somebody starts denying, keep in mind, this conversation is not about shame, blame, or anything else. That's not what we're here for. We're here to move it forward. So, hey, I didn't do that. Say, you know what? I wasn't there. Doesn't really matter. Let's focus right now on how to move forward. And you simply set aside who said or did, both for denial and for blame. Now, occasionally in dealing with conflict, you get to an impasse with people. If there is an impasse, techniques you can use. Ask them, hey, what happens if this doesn't get resolved? Alternatively, you can say, what's the worst case scenario here? Alternatively, you can say, what is possible to make this work? If you did know, hey, what advice does someone else have? Etc. So there are different techniques. Just like in coaching, we come at possibilities different ways. We do the same thing with conflict coaching, with managing those conflicts. Now, what does this all boil down to? The reasons it works, just like coaching. Every person is heard and understood, and every person is part of the solution. That is the reason conflict coaching works. Now, recognizing we've used our time here, I'm going to very quickly share a couple of resources with you. So first off, in terms of coaching, the International Coach Federation is a great resource. In terms of providing conflict coaching or supporting your coaching efforts, the Center for Coaching Solutions. And then in terms of training for coaching, the Center for Coaching Certification. So the International Coach Federation website is coachfederation.org. Lots of great information in terms of coaching and learning coaching. A resource for you to have coach training is the Center for Coaching Certification. So definitely check us out. We have training at all different levels, everything from an initial program, master coach, advanced training. We also do mentor coaching programs for people pursuing a credential in coaching. Then, of course, the Center for Coaching Solutions. So if you want to bring in someone to do conflict coaching or training on conflict coaching that goes a lot further than how much we can do in 30 minutes, that's a resource for you. And of course, above and beyond that, lots of resources you can access immediately in terms of blogs, books, the free webinars we do. We're available for a quick check-in and for outsourcing. So the blog site is coachingblog.centerforcoachingcertification.com. The Coaching Perspective series, new book every year, completely different content every year, written by different graduates of the programs, and it is amazing. I'm having a blast with some students yesterday who said, wow, I can't believe I haven't read this before. This is really good stuff. There are some amazing chapters in there. We also do these free webinars each month. Now, in terms of a quick check, do call or email. If it's a quick question, something we can be helpful on, let us know. As far as outsourcing for your organization, yes, we can provide consulting on starting and running a coaching program. We can provide training for coaches, whether it's a full-blown certification that's ICF approved, or you want to do an abbreviated version or something tailored to your organization, that's available. And then, of course, we have coaches and can set up coaching services for you. What are your next steps? Well, one of the things I want to do is for those of you that are interested, I'm happy to offer a free consultation available to you. When you get the email afterwards with the link to the recording on YouTube, simply reply to that email, let me know you want the free consultation, and I'll send you a link to the calendar. That way you can choose the time that works for you and get yourself scheduled. Do be thinking about the different resources that are available to you. Choose what's going to work. Be intentional planning your process and then follow through, implement that strategy, and that's where you're going to get the results. So thank you, all of you, for being here. I appreciate your time, your participation. Thanks also for the comments in the question panel. I've got some of you saying, hey, some great concepts. I've got other people saying that you're really glad for hearing some of these pieces again. You went through the coach training. So really glad it was helpful to you, and thank you so much. Do let us know how we can be of service to you in the future. Thank you, everyone.